morning. You're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danie Laurel. It's the start of a new trading day. Let's go straight to our top story. Finance Secretary Sonny Dominguez has ordered the Bureau of Internal Revenue to look into how other countries properly impose taxes on digital transactions as the government prepares to tax these kinds of services. Dominguez said the government must keep up with the surge in online sellers after more consumers turned to e-commerce during the COVID-19 health crisis. BIR Commissioner Cesar Dulay said the Bureau will first form a unit that will track sales of goods and services online. The taxman said they will then consult with their counterparts from Russia and South Korea to determine how to properly and effectively tax digital transactions. Last month, the House of Representatives approved a bill that seeks to impose a 12% VAT on digital transactions in the country. These include the online sale of services such as digital ads and subscription of services. The Bangko Sentral, as well as the Philippine Retailers Association, have expressed support for the proposed 12% VAT on digital transactions. Now, the Philippines concluded its negotiations for the Free Trade Agreement, or FTA, with South Korea. This is expected to boost trade and investment between the two countries as both work towards pandemic recovery. Now, Trade Secretary Mon Lopez and his South Korean counterpart Yo Han-koo said both countries are committed to completing all domestic procedures. That's to ensure that the signing of the Philippines-South Korea FTA will happen in early 2022. The South Korean Ministry on Trade, Industry, and Energy announced that the Philippines will remove tariffs on 96.5% of all products traded, while South Korea will lift tariffs on 94.8% of products. For starters, the Philippines was able to secure tariff elimination for bananas, which are one of the country's top exports to South Korea, and the same goes for processed pineapples, which are seen to be duty-free in 7 years. That's good news for local farmers who are seen to have better market access in South Korea for bananas and processed pineapples from the Philippines. Meanwhile, the Philippines will ease access to more South Korean-made cars and automotive parts. The S&P 500 eked out a record high overnight. You can see that on my terminal here. You've got UPS, GP, GE up on very strong results. And let's take a look at how the rest of the markets are going over in Asia. Earlier this morning, those stocks were seen to be dipping already. Still, of course, a lot of concerns lingering on inflation. And not just that, but also China's indebted property sector. And you can see the Nikkei 225 down by 0.5% in early trade. You've also got the Kospi down by 0.5%. So not a pretty picture this morning, despite, of course, that run over in Wall Street. China, of course, has a lot of things going on when it comes to Evergrande Group's deepening debt crisis. Authorities have told the billionaire Hui Ka-yan to use his personal wealth to alleviate that group. Now, speaking of inflation, let's just take a quick peek at the oil story here. This is the WTI crude. And you can see that trading a little bit softening from yesterday. That's at $84.25 a barrel. And the energy crunch is continuing to ripple across the global economy. And it's not just WTI trading at above $48 a barrel. You've also got coal here, and this is the coal story for you. The stockpiles over in the U.S. power plants plunged to the lowest level in at least 24 years. And you can see those prices as well easing from quite record highs. You've also got gold retreating back below $1,800 an ounce, Bitcoin slipping to around $60,500. And let's take a look at, of course, the energy companies here. This, of course, as you've got the NGCP, which is our grid operator, seeing faster power demand growth. They are expecting growth to be at a clip of 6.6% compared to a year from 2025 until 2040. The National Grid is saying that we are well positioned to capture this industrial boom here in the Philippines. And of course, this happened during a share sale briefing of Synergy Grid, which does have an indirect controlling stake in the national grid. They've also mentioned that they've set 160 billion pesos in capex from 2021 until 2025, and they have committed in 25 years to be spending around 440 billion pesos worth of capital expenditures. This, of course, is happening as the Department of Energy has urged the Congress to amend a decree on developing petroleum resources. Here, this is an ask to review a 50-year-old Marcos era presidential decree, which has not changed. They have noted that this has been restricting the investments in the energy industry. Now, to talk more about all of this, we have with us Matt Cabangon of AAA Equities. Good morning, Matt, and welcome.
Hi, Danny. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Matt, let's talk about this oil story and how worried you are about all of this, especially here in the Philippines. We also had, apart from just the oil prices, the peso weakening, we've also got the balance of payments at a deficit as we are, of course, an importer of oil. But nevertheless, it doesn't necessarily seem to be rocking Wall Street when you look at the overnight performance that they're still at record highs despite this whammy.
Yeah, I think inflation is very top of mind for investors in every market right now, and I think it will be the dominant theme uh, for next year. Uh, you're right. Risk is still it's still very risk on across markets, but if we look a little deeper, we are now seeing repricing in Fed hikes. Right, investors are largely expecting the Fed to hike much earlier than previously expected. Uh, Naturally, we're gonna feel that here in the Philippines too, with markets urging the BSP to keep up with the Fed. So this is gonna be a huge economic theme, I think, moving next year. So it's definitely something to watch. It's something to be concerned about.
Okay, but how about the energy companies? We've seen quite a rally in that just simply because of the supply shortages that we've been seeing, particularly in coal, and of course the demand of electricity going up as we try and reopen the economy. Is this, a fundamental or a start of what might be a rally in energy stocks, or is this just a knee-jerk reaction on the prices of oil, which might actually be paring down?
I do believe this is the start of a sustained rally. Because what we've seen over the last several years, a lot of these oil stocks, a lot of these energy stocks were very unloved, right? They were very underinvested. No one wanted to be, an investor in coal or any of these, like, uh, I guess, environmentally unfriendly industries, and that has led to a cyclical underinvestment in these names. So
Mm.
that has led to, of course, undersupply also. So now we as a society are feeling the blowback of that cyclical underinvestment. So we have a lot of catching up to do in terms of building out supply again. So I do think this is going to be a resurgence in these energy stocks.
But what about which type of energy stocks? You already mentioned, a lot of the investment in coal happening. You've got the Ayala Group selling their assets there. You've got the likes, as you mentioned, FGen, ASEN having rallied on the back of renewable power. But then again, like you mentioned, you have Semirara having record dividends because of their performance there. So where are investors supposed to be putting their money right now?
Well, right now the mining companies are the lowest hanging fruit. Uh, the global supply crunch puts them in a very good position. But I think even companies down the supply chain, for example, Petron, right, and Shell, these have been names that have really been unloved for several years now. Uh, it was only last year that Petron had to shut down their refinery here in the Philippines. So that is a very clear sign of the underinvestment going on in this space. Uh, Now, I do expect Petron and Shell, those names, to perform much later on, right? We're going to be feeling the improvement there maybe halfway into next year. So right now, I think it's the miners who you want exposure to, just because you know everything's already built out for them. They're riding the high with these prices, so
Okay.
that's going to be the play for these names.
So these unloved mining stocks are now feeling the love. Let's talk about synergy, Matt. Can you explain to our audience here what exactly is going on from the suspension price of 395 pesos and 80 centavos? They're pricing the follow-on offer between 12 to 17 pesos. It seems like a very far price from what it was doing. Of course, there's going to be some dilution here. But how is this all related to NGCP? And how do we understand whether this is a good stock to be investing in right now?
Right. So there, as you mentioned, there are two key entities here. There's SGP and there's the National Grid (NGCP). Uh, SGP is a minority shareholder in the NGCP, in the National Grid. So really, what we're buying with SGP is a small
Okay.
exposure to the money machine that is the National Grid. So earlier on this year, we saw SGP shares be suspended because they've fallen below the minimum public float.
Mm-hmm.
And through this follow-on offering, they're going to be coming back to the market with essentially a whole bunch of new shares that brings them above that requirement. And it's these new shares that have brought the price down. Now the question on people's minds is, why is it priced so low, right?
Correct.
So
Yeah.
the 12 peso the 12 peso follow-on offering price is the absolute rock bottom of uh, the price range that people were expecting. So when we're talking about the NGCP and the SGP, there's two equal and opposite forces there. So the bull case there is that the National Grid is an incredibly profitable monopoly, right? It's a money machine. It's never had a down year, I would imagine.
Okay.
But the bear case is equally as strong, if not even better, in that the name on the prospectus of this follow-on offering is not NGCP, it's SGP.
Right.
So, and there's so many. I think there's about two or three layers of corporate structure between SGP and NGCP. So it's very unclear actually
Mhm.
how much of the economic benefit will trickle down to the SGP level. And that's what's led investors to shy away
Okay.
from this offer, because really it's very unclear what investors are getting when investing in
Okay.
SGP.
Very interesting. What are your thoughts on NGCP doing an IPO? Would that, as you mentioned, just from a fundamental perspective, from an earnings perspective, be exciting?
Well, I think that's something that the broad public wants. But I
Hmm.
think it's unknown whether that will happen, because it's debatable whether this SGP offer satisfies that IPO requirement, right?
Right.
Does bringing a minority of the shares to the public through a subsidiary or some layered company satisfy the IPO requirement of the National Grid?
Hmm.
I think there are arguments on both sides there, so it's still unclear from an investor's perspective whether an NGCP proper IPO is in the pipeline.
Okay, so right now we do not know whether this synergy will be replacing that float requirement for an IPO of NGCP, but nevertheless, something very interesting to be watching out for in the next couple of weeks. Matt, let's talk about the index in general. We had already hit 7,300. We don't seem to be breaking back above that level, at least in the first 3 days of trade this week. What's your outlook here when it comes to the earnings and the multiples that you see might be a cap or a floor to prevent us from, let's say, going above the 7,300 levels again?
Well, right now, the 72 to 7,400 level in the index is a huge uh, resistance level for our index.
Okay.
We tried this late last year, early this year, and failed. Essentially, breaking above this level would bring us back to pre-pandemic levels for the broad index. So, am I I don't necessarily think we have to close above that this year to
Okay.
be happy with the year's performance. Uh, I don't necessarily think we can do it either, because even though uh, sentiment has improved quite a bit, I just don't think the fundamentals are there to support that break higher. We have seen some earnings so far for the third quarter, and it hasn't really been spectacular, right? I think the market's gonna need a bit more convincing to sort of bring it over that hump, a hump that we've tried before and failed.
Okay, so as you mentioned, we should be happy with what we've got. We might not be closing in on those 2019 levels as of yet. Thank you so much for those insights, Matt Cabangon, AAA Equities. Here are other headlines. We're keeping our eyes on. Insurance premiums grew more than 37% to 187 billion pesos in the second quarter. This is economic reopening, heightened demand for both life and non-life policies. You can see on your screens here the insurance commission told the Philippine Star that premiums sold by life insurers went up by almost 44% to just about 155 billion pesos. Non-life insurers saw their net premiums grow by 13% in the same period due to hikes in automotive policies, among others. Now, Philippine insurers posted a combined profit of 24.63 billion pesos during the second quarter, which is over 29% higher than the same period of last year. On the other hand, industry players also expanded the amount of benefit they released by nearly 47%. That's as the government placed Metro Manila and nearby provinces under lockdown in April. The IC said the figures were computed based on the submission filed by 128 out of the 135 licensed insurers and MBAs in the Philippines. Now, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is considering supporting climate resilient infrastructure here in the Philippines. AIIB President Jin Lee Kin highlighted the country's quote huge need for basic infrastructure. He said connectivity within the archipelago is very important given the geography and topography of the Philippines. Lee Kin also announced the bank's three-point approach to speeding up climate financing. That includes aligning their financial flows to the goals of the Paris Agreement, putting up initiatives to drive investment to accelerate low carbon growth, and finally integrating climate mitigation and adaptation measures into infrastructure investments. And that's the first look into the business day. Today is Wednesday, October 27, 2021. Catch Business World Live for the market close. It's at 3:15 p.m. today. I'm Danie Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are one news.